Welcome to the Talk Like a Leader podcast, where we explore the mindset, skill set, and habit set of leadership communication. Using these tips, techniques, and tactics, you'll be able to talk like a leader to build better relationships and get more done. Your host is Guy Harris, who has more than 20 years of combined professional and military experience in consulting, coaching, and training in areas like team and interaction dynamics, communication strategies and tactics, as well as emotional intelligence. Take it away, Guy.
Hi, this is Guy Harris. Welcome to Talk Like a Leader. And I have with me again this week my friend, colleague, collaborator, and business partner, Kevin Eikenberry, who he and Wayne Termel have recently released a book called The Long Distance Teammate. I'm going to talk about that again today. So welcome, Kevin. Good to have you with me.
Hey, I'm glad to be back yet again. Now, I know it's been a week since I was on, but really it was like 4 minutes since I was on. And I'm glad to be back. I'm glad to still be with you, Guy.
Yeah, podcast world, time goes differently than what is happening in real life. So.
For sure. A little inside baseball, everybody. Now you know.
And this is our third conversation about content from Long Distance Teammate. We've talked about the idea of ethical visibility. We've talked about the idea of building and maintaining trust. And for this week, we'd like to talk about the idea of building and maintaining relationships. So I guess I'll start, Kevin, with your thoughts, perspective on what's the significance of building and maintaining relationships, and is it different, or how is it different in the remote world?
Well, I think we all know it's different in the remote world. Here's the thing. Before the pandemic, 60% of people's social interaction were with people at work. Mm-hmm. You know, way more than 50% of people say they have a best friend or a close friend at work. And so there's the social component of this, which matters. Now, as leaders, that should matter to us. We could have a whole conversation, Guy, about the true epidemic of loneliness and isolation and how working from home could impact that. But that's, I know, not what we're doing today. So here's the thing. There's a social component. It's a good thing component, but there's a business component too. That when people know each other, when they like each other, when, as we talked about last week, when they trust each other, then better work will be accomplished, less conflict, all the other things. So as a leader, it's important that we help our team members get along. We don't have to it doesn't have to be about friendships. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. You don't have to say, I've got to create a team of all friends. No, right. But people have to be able to successfully work together. So our goal should be to help people build and maintain good working relationships.
I guess kind of a clarifying question to bridge from what we talk about in terms of trust, and now we're talking about relationships. How would you distinguish these really closely related and different ideas, trust versus relationship? How is building trust different from building relationships?
Well, they're connected, of course, right? Yeah. And if you think of the people in your life that you have really great relationships with, likely you trust them as well.
Right.
But you can have high trust in someone and not necessarily like them, right? Okay. So they don't have to go together, although many of the things they're symbiotic, and so they may grow. In the book, The Long Distance Teammate, we talk about two considerations that help to determine the type of working relationship you have. Mm-hmm. And so think about it like a grid. And on one axis, it's like, how much relatedness do we have? How related do we feel, from having low relatedness to high relatedness? And then how frequent or infrequent do we have interaction? So infrequent interaction, high interaction. Now, so if you think about it that way, so in the break between the recordings, everybody, Guy and I were talking about one of the things that we both like. I maybe like it a little more than Guy, but we both like barbecue, and I like to smoke meat. And so we were talking about that. Now that's a function of relatedness, right? I wouldn't have that conversation with everybody. I know that he and I share that.
Right.
And so we talked about it. And so that's a sense of relatedness. So the higher, and that, by the way, has nothing to do with trust, really.
They're different. Yeah.
They're different, right? Yeah. So we can think about everyone we work with and say, okay, do I have frequent interaction with them, and high relatedness. Well, with Guy, I don't necessarily have super frequent, not as frequent as we used to. I would say that Guy and I are in what I would call zone C, which is infrequent interaction, but high relatedness.
Yeah.
Right. And so the question is, and so if you have teammates, or if you have, as a leader, if you have team members that you sense that the relationship isn't as strong as it could be, think about those two levers. How could I help people find relatedness, and how could I help them create interaction? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that's missing in our remote working world, as a general statement, is interaction. We have fewer conversations, and even the conversations we have often are transactional, right? So I call Guy on the phone and say, hey, I got a quick question. I know you're busy.
Yeah.
I asked the question, Guy gives me an answer. I said, hey, thanks so much. I appreciate it. That's not an interaction. That's just a transaction. And so we've got to, as leaders, make sure that there's frequency in general, but that there's richness in some of those, in creating real interaction. So those are the two areas two levers that we can work with as a leader if we're trying to help our team members, certainly with a team member, but also across our team. How can we find ways for them to have a sense of relatedness, and how can we build frequency of interaction? Because the higher we move in both of those, the stronger the relationships.
So what are some things that you've noticed, or, I mean, by the way, an important point here is that Kevin has been leading a remote team for
a decade.
Yeah. So what are some things you've learned in that time that help with that relatedness issue? I mean, frequency is probably easier to create than relatedness.
Well, people haven't always figured out how to do it. We could definitely talk about that, but let's talk about the relatedness one. So when a new person joins our team, and to give you context, there's about a dozen people on our team. Mm-hmm. When a new person joins our team, in the first 2 weeks on the job, and thankfully we haven't had anyone join us in 3 years, but we've been doing this for a while, and I know that it works. And I've been encouraging organizations and leaders to do it for a long time, and so I know that this works. And here's the expectation. Within the first 2 weeks that you're here, you have an expectation to have a conversation with every other member of the team for about 20 to 30 minutes. That is not about work. And they'll look at me funny, and I'll say, at least on the phone, but preferably with your webcams, I'd like you to just spend some time getting to know that person. Now, if you're having that call with Guy and you need to also understand Guy's work, you can do that. But I want 20 to 30 minutes of that overall meeting to be about non-work. And while I haven't had to do it, I think if and someday I may build this, is that you might want to give people some expectations around that, a little more clarity around maybe even some questions to ask. But in our case, because all of the other team members know that that's what we do,
right?
They're able to make that conversation not be weird, right? And you can speak to it, Guy, because you've been on the other end of that conversation many times.
Well, I think one of the things that is one of those things, like, so many things in leadership, it's not a single thing you do, even though we might be talking about a single thing at the moment, is that you've created that cultural expectation. I mean, so it was in what you just said, is that you give the new team member this expectation, go do this. It's also true that all the other team members know, hey, this is coming and this is what's expected of you. And so it becomes a team culture that we're supposed to build a relationship with each other.
And here's an important point. Don't miss this. I'm also saying in that moment with my actions that it's okay when you talk to not just talk about business. It's okay.
Exactly.
To spend 5 minutes talking about the hobby that you share or the team that you root for or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. In fact, it's not only okay, it's really desired, right?
And I noticed that, just to kind of think about the dynamics of the Kevin Eikenberry group team, is that I think purely transactional conversations are the exception, not the norm.
Well, I hope. I mean, you probably know that better than me because I'm the special case as the boss.
You wouldn't necessarily see this. But I think the idea from the leadership perspective and how leaders can influence this is like, because you've given permission. You've not only you've given people explicit direction and permission to invest in relationship.
Well, and hopefully I'm also modeling it.
And also modeling it. Yeah. Because very few occasionally we have the transactional conversation, but to your point, even though we don't speak frequently, there is almost always some relational component to the conversation. Hey, what's going on with your kids? Hey, what's going on with your cat, dog, truck. Smoker, whatever.
When are you going to start roasting coffee again, guy? Whatever it is. The point is that, and here's the thing for all of you as leaders, this is super important. When you have a conversation with a member of your team, that part needs to be first. Because if it doesn't come first, it won't happen. Like time will run out, someone will need to go. Like if you're going to spend 2 or 3 minutes on the non-work, it needs to come first. Or it won't happen. It just won't.
And like so many things, the leader's responsibility is to set that environment, I think is what I hear you saying, is what the leader can do is create the environment, create the both explicit and implied and modeled, all of those.
Well, and you said something else that's really important that I didn't say explicitly, and that is that's the culture. The culture is, now not everyone on our team gets along every moment, and not every, I mean, I don't want anyone to think they got some sort of kumbaya team going on there.
No.
But we have a really darn strong team. And while there are occasionally, relationship and communication challenges, that's because we're all humans.
Right.
But as a general statement, I would put the strength of our relationships pretty high. That I see. Yep. And that helps us be successful. That helped us be resilient during the tough times of 2020. We go right on down the reasons why, right? But as a leader, talking like a leader is talking about the importance of these things and then modeling those things as well.
There's also one thing I think we don't want to miss that occurred to me, as you said, that our current state is we don't interact that often, although there's high relatedness. I think there's an element of history that ties into this. And so I think from a leadership perspective, realizing I may need to invest more energy and effort early in the relationship than I do later, because once we have that trust and relatedness, it doesn't take as much to keep it going as it takes to get it started.
It's the flywheel, the momentum. That doesn't mean we can ignore it, though.
And ignore it.
That means I can't go weeks without talking to Guy.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, if it's been a while, we both feel it.
We know. Yeah.
I mean, things are still going okay, but they're not.
Yeah.
We're surviving, but we're not thriving. And so I actually have, in relationship to this guy, and I don't know, I've started to share this for a long time. I never shared it, and I've started to share it. I have what I call my rule of 4. So my goal is that every single day I will have true interactions, not just transactions, but true interactions with 4 members of the team. That may not always be, it might include an exchange in Slack, which is our instant messaging tool, right? They don't all have to be on the phone or on a webcam. But they have to be what I would consider, that both of us would call them an interaction, and not just, hey, where can I find that file? I don't have 4 of those a day. I have more than 4 of those a day, right? But there's a check-in component. And if I'm having a one-on-one with someone, that's one of the 4.
That's one,
right? I'm not saying there has to be 4 unique things. That's all I was doing. But at the end of my day, if I can't say I've had 4 of those, then I don't think I've done my job. It's part of my own benchmarking. And so, to the point with Guy, while I don't have a grid that says how many days since I've talked to Guy, I think I'm pretty good at that in general. And so at some point, if, I've talked to Chuck 4 days in a row, but I haven't talked to Guy in a week and a half, then my rule of 4 is got to include Guy today.
And I'm thinking something you said there's it doesn't have to be the only thing, but like the example of, hey, where's that file? You could probably throw in a relational one in there, and then you've done both at the same time.
So I talked with Angie this morning, actually on the phone briefly. And we mentioned, I think it was on the last episode, that she lives in her RV. She and Mike live in their RV. They happen to be in Florida at the time of this recording. So I had a question I needed to ask her. It was easier to ask her on the phone than in some text-based way. And if all I need to do is ask the question, it could have been a probably literally a 90-second conversation. We had probably a 4-minute conversation, 5-minute conversation. I was reminded of where she is in Florida right now. She told me about the weather. She told me about the ice cream they had last night. She told me about the dog that they met from the campers parked next to them.
Right.
And we had an interaction. There was a giggle. There was more than just, hey, tell me about how this survey works and what I need to do blah, blah, blah.
I want to thank you for being with me today, Kevin. Some really dynamic conversation about relationship. And I think there may actually be a learning point here just in the length of this podcast episode. We went a little longer than typical.
Sorry.
But I think that points to the idea that if we're mindful as leaders, it might actually take a little bit longer on the interaction, the individual interaction, yet you're going to extract a huge amount more value than your time investment. So
that is an investment.
That's an investment,
not just a cost.
Not an expense. Yeah, not a cost. So Kevin, tell us where you can get the Long Distance Teammate.
longdistanceteammate.com. You can learn all about the book, where you can buy it, how to get some bonuses when you buy it, get access to a sample chapter if you're not convinced yet. longdistanceteammate.com.
Awesome book. I recommend it highly. And I think if you'll take some of the perspectives Kevin shares and apply them to your team, you can talk like a leader.
This has been the Talk Like a Leader podcast. You can listen to this show every week wherever you get your podcast. If you haven't, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm Guy Harris, and thanks for listening.